Welcome back to the Stephen A. Smith Show. As promised, the man himself. He's a three-time Super Bowl champion. He's a Hall of Famer. He's one of the greatest quarterbacks in history. I know he's one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the Dallas Cowboys. I can tell you that much. He also does an outstanding job for ESPN on Monday Night Football. The voice of Monday Night Football, the one and only Troy Aikman, is right here. What's going on, buddy? How you doing? How's everything?
I'm good, Stephen. Hey, thank you for having me on.
Well, first of all, are you good? Are you really good? Because I know that as a guy that's won championships with Dallas, you certainly don't root against them. And I'm just wondering, how are you feeling after watching that performance from the Dallas Cowboys yesterday afternoon?
Yeah, I think I'm like the rest of America. Just really didn't see that coming, and I know what the history has been for the Cowboys. I did feel going in that Matt LaFleur would have a game plan that gave them a chance. And I thought early in the game, there would be a few opportunities that we would see that they would create some big plays. I thought they might be able to keep it close up until halftime, but eventually the Cowboys would break away and probably win fairly handedly. Obviously, that didn't happen. It was a shock. I don't know that anyone really knows the answer, Stephen A., because if you look at it, it hasn't mattered really who has been the head coach, who has been the quarterback. There's just been disappointment in the postseason, and not only disappointment. Anytime you lose, there's disappointment, but it's been to where they haven't played up to the level that we're accustomed to seeing of them in the regular season. And for the most part, you know, they haven't shown up in some of the big games. And I think that's the maddening part for so many Cowboys fans and probably for the organization itself.
I can imagine how you felt, but I'll ask anyway because I knew how he felt inside, but to see Jimmy Johnson at halftime
Yeah.
yesterday
Yeah.
on Fox talking to the Dallas Cowboys the way that he did, the disappointment was flagrant. The disgust was evident as well. It
Yeah.
was clear. It's not hyperbole to sit up here and say the Dallas Cowboys looked inept, they looked ill-prepared, and Jimmy Johnson was echoing those words. What was it like to watch him like that?
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you asked about that because I texted with some people after I watched it. And a lot of times on television, as we know, we see analysts that will react, and it's really for show or for television. This was as upset as I've seen Jimmy, and I've been around him a lot, you know, of course, over the last 25 years since he left Dallas. This was as upset as I've seen him since I played for him. And that was the coach. I always kid him about the fact that he's really changed over the years. He's not nearly as intense, but that intensity that we saw as players when he was our coach, that's what America saw in his halftime talk to the team, and he meant it. And when Strahan reacted to him the way that he did, thinking Jimmy was half joking, I could tell that there was no joking about it. He was serious. He was as embarrassed, I think, by the performance up to that point in that ball game as any one of those coaches might have been that were in that locker room themselves.
What did you see, Troy? Did you see a team that was ill prepared? It's one thing when we see mistakes here, whatever, but I'm talking about wide receivers. Musgrave, you saw Dobbs, you saw others wide open. I mean, literally, you had to zoom out. I was explaining that this morning on television. You had to zoom out the camera shot to see people in the vicinity of a Green Bay wide receiver. The defense was nowhere to be found on several occasions. What are we to make of that?
Well, I do think there's a lot of carryover, of course, with Matt LaFleur and what they're doing in Green Bay compared to what Kyle Shanahan is doing in San Francisco and the success that the 49ers have had recently against the Cowboys. And that's why, quite honestly, I thought there would be opportunities for Green Bay in that game for some big plays. I hate – the easy thing is to react to what happened and then say, well, they were poorly coached or they were poorly prepared or whatever it might be. Not that there might not be some truth in that, but obviously is a evaluation that has to take place and go back and watch the film. There were blown assignments. Was it that they weren't prepared for some of those things that they saw in that game, or was it simply that there were some mistakes made on the player's part? Either way, the results are the results. this is just another one of those years where they've got to stomach this throughout the entire offseason. And will there be changes? Might there be changes? That's the $1 million question. And right now, I didn't think any way going into that game that Mike McCarthy's job was in jeopardy. I know coming out of it, just don't know where exactly they turn if they decide to make a change.
For me, let me say this is the last point, and then I'm going to move on to these other games because obviously you got a game to call tonight for ESPN, thinking about Tampa Bay and Philadelphia. Obviously, I'm looking forward to that game as well. Of course, Pittsburgh and playing Buffalo because that game was postponed today because of inclement weather, blizzards practically in the city of Buffalo. But before I move on from the Cowboys, my last question about it is this. When I sit up there and I talk about Troy, there needs to be a change. I'm thinking about a couple of things. Number one, I know Jerry Jones a little bit. He's 81 years of age. He's been speaking about his own mortality. That's number one. Number two, I'm thinking about the level of ineptitude we saw yesterday. Number three, and most importantly, it's not really about firing Mike McCarthy, who's won 12 games each of the last 3 seasons. It's about a 6-time Super Bowl champion being out there available in Bill Belichick, of course, and a reigning national champion and Jim Harbaugh, who actually coached for 4 years in the NFL, coached the San Francisco 49ers to a Super Bowl appearance as well, both being available. It's not really about McCarthy as much as it is about the individuals qualified to replace him who've enjoyed just as much, if not more, success than him. What do you say to that?
Well, what I would say to it is when Jason Garrett was fired, the logic or the rationale behind it was essentially what you just laid out, that there's an opportunity to bring in a guy like Mike McCarthy, who had won a Super Bowl, had won a lot of games, there in Green Bay. And so you bring in a head coach with that kind of pedigree that can help get you over the top. So what we do know is there are no guarantees. I understand the Bill Belichick argument. And if there were a change, it would seem like that's the one that makes the most sense. I've heard some say that, well, could Jerry work with Bill? My answer to that is, he worked with Bill Parcells. He gave up a little bit, but I don't think Jerry gave up as much as what a lot of people would suggest. And I don't know that he would have to give up anything now because Bill Belichick is interested in two things. One, he wants to set the record. And then two, he wants to win a Super Bowl without Tom Brady as his quarterback. And in Dallas, he would have the opportunity to do both of those things. It's a team that's built and ready to go all the way. And that's why everyone's so disappointed and frustrated today after that game yesterday. But will a change be made? I still, looking at it, I personally don't see that happening. And part of the answer in that, Stephen A., is because Jerry's 81 years old. And does he want to go through another regime, a new set of coaches, and all that goes with that? It's not as simple or as clear cut, I think, as a lot of people might think.
That's a good point. Let me transition to the AFC because we saw a rookie quarterback in C.J. Stroud show up in Houston, and I'm looking at the Cleveland Browns, and I'm saying at the time, this is the biggest threat to Baltimore in the AFC because their defense is elite, number one. And number two, Joe Flacco, who's going to turn 39 years of age January 16th, is flinging a football all over the place for crying out loud. I'm like, my Lord, got him off his couch, and he looks like an all-pro quarterback. Yeah. And then C.J. Stroud, a rookie, playing in his first playoff game, shows up, and this is after closing out the regular season in Indianapolis. Right. And I was reading a quote from you where you were very effusive in your praises for this kid. Put into perspective what America, what the football world has been seeing take place in Houston with their rookie quarterback, C.J. Stroud, this season.
Yeah, and I would argue that this weekend was his second playoff game because, as you mentioned, he had to win that Indianapolis game to even get into the postseason. And he might have had his best game of the year against them, against the Colts. And so, here he is on the biggest stage, and he continues to play at a really high level. I was so impressed with him when I saw him in the regular season. I was getting ready for a Jacksonville game, and they had just come off of a win against Houston. And while I was watching Jacksonville's defense, I was mesmerized by C.J. Stroud. And then last week, getting ready for that ball game and watching him, he just does everything so well. He obviously was well coached in college. It's hard to make that kind of ground up if you haven't been as a rookie. But I also think that the situation for him in Houston is amazing. Bobby Slowick, another one of these disciples of the Kyle Shanahan tree, and I think he's on the fast track to becoming a head coach. Wouldn't be surprised if he lands a head coaching job in this cycle. But CJ
Wow.
Stroud has been nothing short of phenomenal. His feet, his ability to get through progressions, him not being fooled by coverages, and he's extremely accurate, especially on the deep ball. I thoroughly have enjoyed watching him play. I think the Flacco story is amazing. I was really proud of Joe and what he accomplished, but to see the young guy come out and play like he did in his first playoff game, like you mentioned, was really terrific.
What was it like for you watching him put his talents on display? Watching Jordan Love, who's not a rookie, been in the league, his fourth year, but spent the first 3 years on the bench or so, and then this is his first season starting, his first playoff game yesterday. He performs the way that he performs, juxtaposing all of that to Dak Prescott and his struggles in his ninth year or eighth year going into his ninth year in the National Football League. What are we to make of all of that, Troy?
That's a good question. I think that's a point that people go to fairly or unfairly, and I don't think it's unfair. When you see a Jordan Love playing on the road and playing at the level that he was able to play to, and also again with C.J. Stroud, and for the Cowboys to be at home, to be a team that was averaging 40 points a game, to be a high scoring offense, and then to not get anywhere close to that. Yeah, I mean it's not good, and it has to be better, and everybody knows that it has to be better. But how does it get better is the part that nobody really quite has the answer to.
People say to us, be patient, be patient, be patient when you see anybody struggle in any profession, quite honestly. But for a guy as experienced as you, as knowledgeable as you, does there come a point in time where the die is cast, where you say, okay, this is who they are? Like when I think about Dak Prescott, it's like, you've been in the league long enough. Okay, September, October, November, December, you're balling. January, all of a sudden, it's a struggle. Do you get to a point where you say, okay, you've changed the coach, all right, maybe it'll be better, all right? You change the offensive coordinator, it'll be better. Or when do you get to a point where you're like, this is who that person is, and ladies and gentlemen, that's just the way it goes?
Yeah, well, what I do know, Stephen A, is that as a quarterback, you are judged on the wins and losses, and I like that. That's the way that it is.
Okay.
The wins defined my career, and I think there's something to be said for that, because even more so today in the NFL than at any other time, way more so than when I played. The quarterback has an enormous impact on the outcome of these games. It's like being a great player on an NBA team. They used to say, well, yeah, but that's one of 5 guys. Now you're one of 11, one of 22. And yet we've seen great quarterbacks be able to carry those teams. But I also know that until you do it, there's always the critic that says, well, you can't do it. So you can't do it until you finally do it. And so that's the question that I think that everybody has to ask themselves. There are those guys who struggled for a period of time and then were able to win. And the guy who comes to mind right away is John Elway. They had struggled. They hadn't won in the Super Bowl. They'd gone 0 for 3. And, late in his career is when he was able to finally, get over the hump and then won back-to-back Super Bowls. So can it happen? Absolutely it can happen. But I think as an organization, those are the questions you have to ask yourself. And I think the people that are within those teams, they know better than anyone because they're around those guys on a daily basis. But unfortunately for Dak, and I've heard you throughout the day and at other times, we all love Dak. We love what he represents. But at the end of the day, it's, he's paid, everyone is paid to win. And it's a bottom line business, and they all understand that.
Transition into the game, I mean, that's near and dear to your heart. We got Tampa Bay going up against Philadelphia tonight. What are you looking for, looking at this game?
Well, I'm looking, quite honestly, to see if Philadelphia can start fast. And that's very cliche in our sport. But in light of the way that things have gone for them, I think it's imperative that they come out and they make some stops on defense. They get something going on offense. Because if they don't, it just feels like this is an organization and has been for 6 weeks to where there's a lot of rumblings, there's a lot of disarray, and it's not just from what we've seen on the field. I think it extends through the coaching ranks. I think it extends throughout the organization. And it feels like if they do not get off to a good start, that this could implode right in front of our eyes, like we've seen over the last several weeks. And Tampa is riding a real high. So we had the game week 3. It wasn't close. Philadelphia got after them really good, but these are two totally different teams. That game has no relevance in this one. And Baker Mayfield is a great story.
Yeah.
I love what he's done, and I'm excited. He didn't play well week 3, and I'm looking forward to watching him play, and I hope he plays well.
Shocked at all at how Philadelphia has nosedived, or is it as simplistic as, look, they lost both coordinators to Arizona and Indianapolis respectively, and they're both head coaches there now in Steichen and Gannon, and then of course Jalen Hurts hasn't been 100% healthy now. AJ Brown has gone down. They lost Dallas Goedert at one time during the season when he got hurt during the Dallas game. There's been a plethora of injuries, plethora of issues, et cetera, et cetera. But is that your explanation for the nosedive they've taken and losing 5 of their last 6 regular season games?
Well,
Or is there something else that stands out?
yeah, I think they do miss their coordinators. That's hard. It has not been smooth throughout the year on either side of the ball. So I do think that is a factor. But let's remember they were 10-1,
Yeah.
so they were positioned even with the change of the coordinators. They went through a gauntlet of games where they had Miami, they had Dallas, they had Buffalo, then they, of course, and they won those games. They won that stretch of games, and then they had San Francisco and then Dallas again, and those were not close games, but it was kind of like, okay, that's fine. I mean, the fact that they had weathered some of those other games and found ways to win, I was impressed with that, but it just then felt like there was an overreaction by the organization when they replaced Sean Desai with Matt Patricia. And I don't know that we'll ever know the answer, but it didn't feel to me like that was Nick Sirianni's decision. Maybe it was, but it didn't seem to me that it was. And then I think everybody kind of started questioning, what are we? And we've seen the results of that. So I think there's just a lot more to it than saying, well, it's the coordinators or, well, it's the injuries. What this looks like for them may not look a whole lot different from what we might see in Dallas. It's going to, but at the end of the day, here's what I do know is that what happened at the end of the year, Dallas overtaking the Eagles and becoming the number 2 seed, Eagles number 5. None of that really matters. Dallas, even though they won 12 games, the fact that they lost in the wild card round, they're no different than the Carolina Panthers or the Chicago Bears or the New England Patriots. It doesn't matter. When you become an organization, and Philadelphia is the same way, it's either win a championship or go home, and there's no looking at it any other way. And if you do get to the postseason, there's very few teams, next to none, quite honestly, that if you don't win a playoff game, it is a miserable feeling, and you carry that with you throughout the entire offseason. So we'll see what happens tonight. I really don't know what to expect, Stephen A. I don't know if we're going to see the Eagles rebound or not, but I'm looking forward to it.
There's a few more questions before I let you get on out of here. I'm thinking it was San Francisco versus Baltimore, and then I watched Detroit. Because that Rams team is a damn good team. But I watched Detroit. Yeah. Detroit looks like something. Dan Campbell has definitely turned that around along with Brad Holmes, the general manager. Got to give credit where credit is due. But that's in the NFC. In the AFC, I'm like, no matter who you, I don't care how great Baltimore has looked. I don't care how great Lamar Jackson has built. As long as Patrick Mahomes is alive, there's a chance. What's your thinking?
I agree. No, I agree. I love San Francisco. I have for many years. I have said this, and I believe it. Kyle Shanahan is the best head coach in football. I think he's the best offensive coordinator, play caller in football. And what they do and the style in which they play, they're built for any type of game that you want to play. And usually they're imposing the style that they want, which is very effective. And so I do like them a lot. Detroit isn't far off of that. And what Dan Campbell's been able to do has been nothing short of amazing. And there's a toughness and a grittiness to them that you just don't see in a lot of teams. And so I like those two teams as well. If I had to pick one, ultimately I'd go with San Francisco. In the AFC, I love Baltimore. As much as they've done and as much as they've accomplished under John Harbaugh, I do think there's still a tendency to not give them their due during the year. And I've talked to a lot of people who have been in that building who have, some of them have been fired. They were let go. Others just left for various other reasons. But to a man, they all rave about the way that that organization is structured, the respect that they have for everybody in the building, the job that John Harbaugh does. So I like them a lot. I've had them a couple of times now. We're going to have them maybe next week, depending on how things go today. And then Patrick Mahomes, and you can't count him out, of course. So I would tend to go with those two teams as well. But it shapes up for a really great championship weekend when we get to that point, and of course, then once we get to the Super Bowl.
Would you roll with Baltimore over Kansas City?
I probably would. I probably would this year. Yeah, I would. I think, because Kansas City, they've been so unpredictable in what they're going to be, and that game then, of course, being played in Baltimore. I would go with Baltimore if there was a matchup between those two.
Before I let you get on out of here, I want to state for the record, I think one of the luckiest things that has happened to ESPN, especially in my career, was getting you and Joe Buck. Luckiest thing.
You.
And I mean, you guys are, you're the A team. You're the best in the business, no question about it. How has life been for Troy Aikman calling football games? First, initially for many years on Sunday, during Sundays, and before you came to ESPN with Monday Night Football, and now you've established yourself as probably the preeminent color commentator in the national, calling National Football League games. How do you feel about your career on a personal level and what it's morphed and what it's developed into?
Yeah, it's Stephen A. It's beyond anything that I could have imagined, quite honestly. When I was playing, first of all, the players in the locker rooms, we didn't talk about going into television. I think most players in most locker rooms around the league now do talk about, hey, I'm going to go into television. There's a lot of opportunity there, and that's not uncommon. When I played, that was not the norm. We all expected that Michael Irvin would go into television. We all expected that Deion Sanders would go into television.
Right.
And I had no interest in going into television, but I went over to NFL Europe and I did some games and I enjoyed it. And I was told by Fox at that time when I retired that they would have a job for me, and things worked out, and I got paired with Joe, and here we are 22 years later, he and I working together, and we're at ESPN, and it's been an amazing ride. I was a single father for a number of years, and this profession afforded me an opportunity to be a single dad and not miss too much with my girls. So I'm forever grateful for that chance, but never in my wildest dreams could have imagined that I'd be doing it this long. I thought I would do it for a couple of years and then move on to something else. And I always thought that when I was playing that eventually I'd go to work in a front office. And there's always been a part of me that wanted to see if I could put together a roster that was capable of winning a championship. And I think that opportunity has sailed at my age, which is fine. I love where I'm at ESPN. It's been a great place for me to work. And I'm hopeful that I'm able to do it for a lot longer.
They're comparing you to John Madden, and they use that comparison in this respect. Troy Aikman tells it like it is. Do you like that? You like that about yourself? You like people saying that's what you do?
Well, when I'm away from the camera, I do have a tendency to be very direct, and I'm working on that, Stephen A. I mean,
Why? I see no problem with it, Troy. You're talking to the wrong person if you think that needs to change. I love
it. What I don't want is I don't mind it. What I hope isn't the case is I have enormous respect for the participants that take the field, the coaches that coach, and the officials that officiate. I've got enormous respect for everyone involved, and I know that what they do is not easy because I was a part of it at one time. And so I would never want any comments that I make to take away from the respect that I have for them. So I'm a little guarded in that regard. But
Okay.
if I feel something, I tend to say it. And some people I think like that, and some people don't. But that's true of any analyst, whatever their style may or may not be. But I'll take it. I wouldn't say it's unfair if that's how people see me.
Last comment. I got to give so much love to Joe Buck as well, because this is a man that calls NFL games. He does baseball stuff. It's at the point where Joe Buck is like when he shows up at an event, you're like, oh, it matters. Really, that's really what it comes down to. It's like he's there, so the game must be important, and obviously the same applies to y'all. Listen, man, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule, buddy. I really, really appreciate it, man. And I had to get your comments after I saw what transpired with the Dallas Cowboys yesterday as well. So I really thank you as always, my man, looking out for me. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to watching you call tonight's game.
Thank you, Stephen A. Yeah, anything you ever need, the answer is yes. Appreciate you.
Same with you, my man. Same with you. I ain't even ask you about Pittsburgh and Buffalo, because I don't know who's going to win, because, damn it, the weather's so bad, I don't even know if they're going to play the game. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Unreal. Yeah, that'll be a fun one, though.
How about that? Take it easy, Troy. We'll talk soon, all right?
You bet. Thank you, buddy.
All right, buddy. Thank you. One and only Troy Aikman right here on the Stephen A. Smith Show. 888-SAS-5303. That's 888-727-5303. You don't have to call in, because I'm only taking texts or tweets as opposed to calls, because I'm not in my home studio. But that's the number I like y'all to know y'all calling into. He is the great Troy Aikman, and it's always an honor and privilege to talk to my buddy. He's big time. I love him. I love the job that he does, and I hope y'all are looking forward to watching him tonight call that game, the Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Stick around. I got more to come your way. It's the Stephen A. Smith Show right here over the digital airwaves of YouTube. Back with more in a minute.